Check your thermostat. Maybe it says 20 degrees, maybe 22. You said it once, months ago, and you haven't thought about it since. Now hold that thought, because every single one of your ancestors, going back hundreds of thousands of years, faced the same problem every winter. No thermostat, no insulation, no walls, unless they built them, just their hands, whatever the landscape gave them, and a cold that would kill a modern person in a matter of hours. And they didn't just survive it. Some of them built things during it that still make engineers uncomfortable. Let's start with what the cold actually was, because the Ice Age makes it sound like a slightly worse January. It wasn't. At the peak of the last glacial period, roughly 20,000 years ago, winters on the open steppe of Eurasia could hit 40 below. That's the kind of cold where exposed skin starts dying in minutes, where breathing hurts, where wind doesn't just chill you, it actively removes heat from your body faster than you can generate it. A modern human dropped there in modern clothes, with no fire and no shelter, would probably be dead before morning. And the standard image we all have is the same one. Hunched cave people shivering around a tiny fire, barely making it to dawn. Miserable, passive, lucky to be alive. That image is wrong. And the reason it's wrong is one of my favorite things in archaeology. Because think about what that image actually implies. It implies people who were barely hanging on, who got through winter by luck and by shivering. But these were populations that lasted in these landscapes for thousands of years. You do not survive thousands of years of 40 below winters by being lucky. Luck runs out in a single bad season. What gets you through is knowledge, passed down, refined, and taught. And that means the people who lived on that steppe weren't victims of the cold. They were specialists in it. Let's start with the cave thing, because it's the biggest misconception. Ancient humans mostly did not live deep inside caves. Caves are cold, dark, damp, badly ventilated, and often already occupied by something with claws. What people actually used over and over were rock shelters, shallow overhangs near the entrance where daylight still reached and smoke could escape. And out on the open steppe, where there were no caves at all, they had to do something much harder. They had to build. And here's the first genuinely clever thing. Where the ground allowed it, people dug down. Semi-subterranean shelters show up across the Ice Age world, a floor sunk below ground level with a built structure over the top. This isn't decoration, it's physics. Air temperature swings violently. Ground temperature does not. Below the surface, soil holds a far more stable temperature than the air above it, which is exactly why a cellar stays cool in summer and why a basement never gets as cold as the yard. So they weren't fighting the cold. They were dropping below it. That's the same reason Arctic animals burrow, and the same reason people still build root cellars. And there's a second advantage that's easy to miss. Wind is the real killer, not temperature. Moving air strips heat off a body far faster than still air at the same reading. It's why 40 below with wind is a completely different animal to 40 below without it. The moment your living space is sunk below the surface, the wind is going over your head instead of through you. One decision, two problems solved. Then there's Dolni Vestonice in what's now the Czech Republic, a site around 26,000 years old, and one of the most extraordinary places from the entire period. This wasn't a desperate camp. Archaeologists found the remains of huts with hearths inside them, a kiln for firing clay, thousands of pieces of fired ceramic figurines, some of the oldest fired ceramics anywhere in the world, and pressed into fragments of that fired clay, something nobody expected. Impressions of woven textiles. 26,000 years ago, in the middle of an ice age, people there were weaving, cord, netting, basketry. The imprints are there in the clay, which means they weren't just wrapping themselves in raw hide. They had textile technology. That completely changes the picture of what winter clothing could have been. But the thing that stops people cold, the thing that made me want to make this video, is what they built where there was no wood. Out on the treeless plains of what is now Ukraine and Russia, people built houses out of mammoths. Not metaphorically, structurally. At Mezhyrich in central Ukraine, 4 of these structures have been found. Each one is a rough circle, roughly 6 to 10 meters across, assembled from hundreds of mammoth bones, skulls arranged around the base, tusks curved into arches overhead, jaw bones, and this is the detail that gets me, stacked in interlocking, deliberate, repeating patterns. Like herringbone brickwork, a hearth sits near the center. Stone tools and debris are scattered inside and around. One of these structures took an estimated 149 mammoth bones. Large mammoth bones weigh a serious amount even when dry. A mammoth skull is not something one person carries, So this was a group project, hauling, sorting, fitting, and stacking hundreds of enormous bones into a stable dome. Then almost certainly covering the frame with stitched hide. That is not survival instinct. That's architecture. Some people call it the oldest surviving architecture we have. And here's the part that's genuinely new. In late 2025, a study led by archaeologist Wei Chu redated one of these structures using a smarter method, dating the remains of small mammals found in the same cultural layers, rather than the mammoth bones themselves, which can be misleading because the bones may have been old already when they were collected. The result? That structure dates to roughly 18,000 years ago, which puts it right in the harshest, coldest phase of the last glaciation, exactly when you'd most need it. Now, I have to be honest with you here, because this is where a lot of videos would just keep hyping. Archaeologists still argue about what these structures actually were. Some think they were dwellings, others think storage or bone caches or something ritual, possibly monuments. The new dating suggests the site was returned to over a long stretch of time, but the occupation itself may have been short, a few visits across centuries rather than a permanent village. So the honest version is, we know people assembled enormous, deliberate, engineered structures out of mammoth bone in the worst cold on Earth. What exactly they used them for is still being worked out. That's more interesting than pretending we've got it solved. Either way, none of it works without fire. And in the Ice Age, fire wasn't just heat. Fire was the whole operating system. Here's the problem. On the open steppe, there are no trees. So what do you burn? The answer, and this is documented in the hearths themselves, is bone. Analysis of Ice Age hearths shows bone being used as fuel, sometimes alongside wood, sometimes seemingly instead of it. Bone burns differently to wood. It's harder to light, but fat-rich bone can sustain a slow, hot burn for a long time. In a landscape with no timber, a pile of bones from the animal you already killed is a fuel supply. Think about the loop that creates. The mammoth is your food. The mammoth is your building material. The mammoth is your fuel. And the mammoth hide is your roof and your coat. One animal, and your entire winter runs on it. Nothing wasted, because nothing could afford to be. And that's a completely different mental model to the one we have. We treat an animal as a meal, they treated an animal as a supply chain, and then there's the thing people never think about, which is ventilation. Any sealed shelter with people breathing and a fire burning inside fills up with moisture. In freezing temperatures, that moisture condenses and freezes, and a structure that's frozen from the inside starts failing. So you need airflow, enough to clear the damp and the smoke, but not so much that you're heating the open sky. Getting that balance right with hide and bone by trial and error across generations is not a small thing. So now picture the inside, a dome of bone and hide, sunk slightly into the ground, a hearth in the middle, hide layers overhead, 40 below outside, and a group of people in there with nowhere to go for weeks. What did they do? They slept, but not the way you do. There's a well-known experiment from 1992 by the psychiatrist Thomas Wehr, where volunteers were kept in long artificial nights with no electric light for weeks. Their sleep drifted into 2 blocks, a stretch of sleep, then a period awake in the dark, then a second stretch of sleep. And historical records from pre-industrial Europe describe exactly the same pattern, a first sleep and a second sleep, with a wakeful gap between them that was completely normal and had a name. So when you wake up at 2 in the morning and lie there thinking you're broken, you might just be running an old factory setting. And that waking gap, plus the long dark hours before sleep, is where something big happened. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner studied conversations among the Jew/Huansi and compared daytime talk to firelight talk. In the day, most conversation was practical. Tracks, plants, resources, complaints about who wasn't pulling their weight. At night, by the fire, the overwhelming majority of it turned into stories. Myths, ancestors, people far away, jokes. Now apply that to a bone house in an Ice Age winter. Weeks indoors, nothing pressing to do, a fire, and a group of people who have run out of practical things to say. That's not dead time. That's the most productive cultural space in prehistory. It's where stories got told and retold until they became myth, where the young learned everything by sitting still and listening, and where an astonishing amount of the art from this period plausibly got made, because carving a figurine or a bone needle takes hours of patient, warm, indoor work. Which brings us to clothing, and one more thing that quietly changed everything. Eyed needles, actual sewing needles with a hole drilled through them, show up in the archaeological record in this period. That sounds mundane. It is not. A needle means tailoring. It means fitted, layered, closed clothing instead of a hide draped over your shoulders. It means sleeves that seal at the wrist and seams that block wind. You cannot survive 40 below in a blanket. You can survive it in a fitted, multi-layered suit. The needle is arguably one of the most important cold weather technologies ever invented, and it is a sliver of bone with a hole in it. And all of this had to be planned in advance. You cannot build a bone dome in a blizzard. You cannot tailor a winter suit in January. The hunting, the bone collection, the hide preparation, the sewing, the fuel stockpiling, all of it had to happen in the warm months for a winter that hadn't arrived yet, by people who understood the year as a shape and their place in it. That's the actual insane part for me, not the mammoth bones, the forward planning, because planning like that requires something strange, the ability to be motivated by a problem that doesn't exist yet. In August, when it's warm and food is plentiful and there is absolutely no reason to be worrying about February, somebody in that group had to look around and start collecting bones. That's not instinct. Instinct handles now. That's a mind running a simulation of a future it isn't in and doing hard physical labor today on behalf of a version of itself that's cold and hungry months from now. Most animals cannot do that at all. We built a civilization on it, then the Ice Age ended. The climate warmed, forests spread, and the whole system, bone architecture, steppe fuel management, the specific knowledge of how to build a dome out of a dead mammoth quietly stopped being necessary. Nobody wrote it down. It wasn't destroyed, it just became irrelevant and slipped away. So go back to your thermostat. The number on it represents something your ancestors achieved too. Real, reliable warmth in far worse conditions than you will ever experience. The difference isn't that they couldn't get warm. They could. The difference is what it cost. Every warm night required months of preparation, a group working together, continuous repair, and knowledge accurate enough that being wrong could kill your family before dawn. You didn't invent warmth, you inherited it from people who solved this with bone, hide, fire, and an almost unreasonable refusal to die. The next time the cold comes and you reach for that dial without thinking about it, remember that being warm is one of the rarest things a human being has ever been. If this made you look at your own house a little differently, you know what to do. I'm Fred. I'll see you in the next one.